Well, the food pyramids got it wrong again. I mean, look, and you did an upgrade, and you'd be in denial if you said the previous method worked, because it didn't, right? Like, the evidence is just clear as day. Obesity, morbid obesity are both at an all-time high. People are more unhealthy than they've ever been, and that's trickled down into the youth in horrible ways. And yes, you can blame technology to a degree, but nutrition and knowing how to eat and knowing your body has a lot more to do with it. And so it hasn't been working. And unfortunately, most people are confused and overwhelmed. And so I can appreciate having something out there. The problem is, though, we don't need a pyramid. People don't eat by a pyramid. When they binge, they don't think about, oh my gosh, what's the pyramid I'm supposed to be on? No. Eating is a much bigger issue, and so you need to have a system, not a pyramid. And so, look, the food pyramid emphasizes better stuff, right? I have it up on my screen here. It emphasizes protein, which again is undeniable. Like, you need more protein to be healthy. You just can't argue that. Now, I've had people who, and particularly in working with women in menopause, where it's a very difficult stage. Anybody who's been in menopause clearly knows better than I that whatever's worked up to that point doesn't work to the same extent that it once did. And when that happens, your metabolism is slowing down. There's a lot of body changes, and you have less room for error. And at the end of the day, most of us, not just women in menopause, but most of us in this world are sitting more than we stand, which by definition makes us sedentary. Carbohydrates aren't bad, but if you're sitting more than you stand, your metabolism is slower, and you're eating primarily carbs or fats, that's going to store. You're not going to utilize that as energy, right? You're just not with most activity levels. Like, unless you're an endurance athlete training 2 to 4 hours, a day, or some sort of like competitive athlete, you don't necessarily need carbohydrates. Now, that said, I don't think you should cut them out completely, because it's more for mental reasons. In any event, the base of the other food pyramid was 7 to, I think, 11 servings of rice, white bread, cereal, pastas per day. Like, you show me a healthy adult who's not a competitive athlete or an endurance athlete who eats that much per day, and I'll give you $1 million. It doesn't exist, all right? And don't give me like a 22-year-old, all right? Give me a woman who's going through menopause and all those metabolic challenges, or anyone who's middle-aged. But I'll tell you, it doesn't exist, because that's just too many calories. And so the new pyramid prioritizes protein, as it should. Most people, because if you don't have enough protein, you lose muscle. So you can lose weight, but if you're losing muscle protects your body, all right? And also, by the way, muscle is what people identify as lean, right? Like, skinny is not something we want to strive for. Skinny is a lack of muscle. And by the way, if you're someone who's skinny, I'm not saying in that way, but a lot of people strive for the outcome of being skinny. But really, what you're talking about is lowering body fat and looking leaner, having a better body composition. That you can't do that without enough muscle. I see this working with so many GL1P people who are taking GL1Ps, which there's nothing wrong with, by the way. It could be a tool, but that's a larger discussion I talk about in another video. But the point is, because their appetite is suppressed, they're not eating enough calories. And even those who are on GL1P who prioritize protein, it's hard to get, most people are getting anywhere, or someone who's gotten a gastric bypass or gastric sleeve. Most of these individuals who are prioritizing protein are getting 60 to 100 grams of protein per day, which is just not enough. And so what ends up happening is you lose muscle, your skin quality decreases, some people lose hair, your nails start to change, like the growth and development of that affects your skin. So protein's more than just muscle. And by the way, there's a lot proteins in a lot of different things that we don't give it credit for, but obviously you want to prioritize something with a higher percentage of protein to get the amount of you need per day. But in any event, I like that. I like that it has vegetables and fruits up there, mostly vegetables first, which I don't actually agree with, because vegetables are good, obviously, but what's never talked about is a lot of people have sensitivities to vegetables because they have gut issues and because of all the other things that I'll be talking about in this video. So it's not, yes, vegetables are good, but not for everybody. And that's, by the way, an overall sort of point here is that you can't create one chart of how to eat and how to prioritize food for all people. I see lactose on there. Most people have some level of lactose intolerant. I would argue everybody does with mainstream lactose. Lactose is not created equal. If you go to a beautiful grass-fed healthy farm, yeah, of course, that's going to hit the system different, but some people would still be sensitive to it, and there's a spectrum of it, and even if you don't have to go to the bathroom when you have lactose, what ends up happening is it's inflammatory because of a lot of the farmings, and a lot of that goes into the dairy product, and so that causes causes digestive issues, and so it is a real problem. So to have that right at the top, it's like there's a lot more context there, right? And so and I can go on and on and on, but the point is we needed a change for sure. I can appreciate that there is a change, especially as there hasn't been much in that, but it's a much bigger discussion. And so today I'm going to talk about the 3 main issues that the new food pyramid has, as well as give you the 5 core things that really are what you need to eat healthy, not just now, but for the rest of your life. Because it can't be something you got to memorize, and it can't be something that is so strict that makes it hard to follow, because otherwise it just ain't going to happen. All right. So, I kind of talked a little about this, but we all eat differently. All right. So the number one issue is people aren't rational eaters. Most of us. Most of us are eating because our blood sugar drops, which could be through the hormones and nervous system, and so that makes us feel hungry. Some of us eat out of boredom. Some of us eat because we have a lot of sweets in our diet, and so that bacteria and those toxins or artificial sweeteners, your Crystal Lights of the world, the Gatorade Zeros, diet sodas, all of those. Yeah, you could argue the calorie thing, cool, but what's happening to those artificial sweeteners is most people get affected in the gut. And that creates a bacteria if it's not getting processed through your body, similar to calories like added sugar that your body has not enough use for. And so it becomes toxic, creates acidity, creates gut issues, all of these things. But the point is that if that's happening, generally that bacteria wants to replicate, and that can oftentimes cause cravings. You ever find when you actually stop eating sweets and start eating more, nutrient-based foods, the cravings go away, right? Well, that's a reflection of what's going on in your gut. So convenience, there's so many reasons why people eat. And so, look, I said it earlier, but nobody binge eats because they forgot the food pyramid, there's a lot more going on here. So the other issue is that it completely ignores hormones and nervous system. Look, if you're very stressed, your nervous system is really stressed, in some cases, some people need more food. You get hungrier, but that's not the case for everybody, believe it or not. There is some people where that elevation of cortisol affects them in a way where they don't feel as hungry and they lose weight, right? And oftentimes it's not the good weight, because you're going to naturally lose muscle when you're not intentional about it. It's just what happens. We all go through a process called sarcopenia, which is a natural degeneration of muscle tissue over time. That affects all of us, and it affects us worse as we age. And unfortunately, sorry ladies, but it seems women seem to be more sensitive to it, right? So if you're not taking in enough nutrients, then you have that happening in the background, good luck. So there's just so many things that they kind of go hand in hand, all right? And so your nervous system, if you're somebody who trains a lot, there's a certain type of calories that needs to refill your body, which becomes increasingly important as we age. On the other end of things, if you're that person who is just not, similar to the person who's overly stressed, who's just not hungry, you're still not getting enough nutrients. So, and hormones account for this. This happens. I work with a lot of women. You notice right around that 22-year-old mark, there's a hormone. Obviously there's hormonal changes much earlier, but I'm talking about morely adults. Is that there's a hormone change. There's the first change, I would say, women physiologically will go by at least during that time, where their metabolism starts to slow down, hormone starts to change and shift a little bit. This then happens with every subsequent baby. Then, of course, the closer you get to menopause, which can start at 36, hits some women much later. Perimenopause, there's no time on how long that lasts for. There's not enough research on this, but I can tell you, working with thousands of women, it varies. And oftentimes, the first thing that happens is a drop off in metabolism. And then if you're not eating enough food, that affects your hormones. So, and you're having hormonal change because of menopause. So like, there's so much going on. You get, and I recognize like you want to simplify it, right? I get that, and I can appreciate that. But like I'll share later, like what I'm about to share, it's very simple. There's just 5 areas, and it's a system. And what a system is something you can follow in any circumstance. It's a map. Whereas, what are you going to do? You got a menu, you're going to pull out your pyramid and try to figure that out? No, you need to learn the system and how your life fits into the system. And it's really isn't all that difficult. So, another reason why people overeat is their blood sugar drops, right? And when that, or if you are feeling going through some sort of emotional trauma, so many of us have, some level of behavior learned that food is comfort. And this goes early on as a kid. If that is your mechanism, and by the way, it's understandable, and I'm not saying you shouldn't ever do it, but if it is in control of you versus you of it, there's a problem. And guess what? The food pyramid doesn't talk about any of that, yet that is something a lot of people deal with. So it needs to be thought about in this discussion if we're talking about how to teach people how to eat healthy, because isn't that, after all, the goal of the food pyramid? And to eat healthy requires a lot bigger of a conversation than exactly what you're putting into your mouth. And understanding, which is really the third main issue, that we are all different. We have people who are more energetic because they have faster metabolisms naturally. Now you can adjust metabolism, but we have people who naturally will move more. We have people who naturally move less, and we have everybody in between. And so to say that this is one thing and we're all going to follow is just absurd. And so let's get into like what it is that you need. That's not a one-size approach. It's a system. And so I had a graphic made, but I don't love it yet. I'm still working on it. But you want to think of the pyramid as like 4 different segments, and each segment is equally important, right? And so I'll list them off quickly, and then I'll go into details to why each of them are. But your recovery, which is your nervous system, but also your mind and body. This directly affects your appetite and nutrition. And by the way, if you're not getting in the right type of nutrition, you will not recover as much, and that will perpetuate the nervous system issues, right? This is why this conversation is so much bigger. The mental fitness, mind and body, what you feel, what you think. This stuff is very important. A lot of people aren't eating because they're like, oh, I got to hit my basal metabolic rate or else my energy is going to drop and I'm going to store fat. No, they don't think like that. They're like, I'm hungry. What's something's going to make me feel good, right? Why are they want to feel good, right? A lot of that is because they don't feel right now. They're not happy in their own skin. They're going through a lot of stress. They have a negative image of self. They were never really ever taught how to eat and be healthy in the world, and yet are expected to in a world that is everly changing. There's an abundance of information, and it's very easy to compare yourself to other people. So when you're making progress, you're like, or not, I say making progress, but what I mean by that is you're starting something, right? You're starting a new program, and I would perceive that as making progress because you are doing something. But what can happen is when you do start something, and particularly if your metabolism is slower or you're just a new beginner at this thing, this diet, this meal plan, this way of life, it's a slow process. And what ends up happening is in that process, you start to feel bad about yourself. And this is, again, insecurities and stuff that happen way earlier on in life that carry with us and get reinforced through adult behavior. But mind and body is mostly what dictates what eats. I mean, the body, that's what food is. It's fuel, right? And I'll talk about that in the next thing. So like you're feeding your body. That's the intention of eating. It's not to just feel good, right? And I'm not saying you shouldn't enjoy food either, but we need to understand what it's actually there for and recognize that there is a direct correlation between our emotions and what we eat, if we eat, because that's another element that a lot of people struggle with. And, I mentioned this quickly earlier, but fuel, like what it is that you're actually eating and you're actually drinking. There's no discussion of artificial sweeteners. There has to be a discussion of lactose in this conversation, gluten while we're at it. And not to mention all the other stuff that's getting added to our foods. Now, I recognize people are on budgets. I hear that, but it's not all or nothing, right? So we incentivize like high sugar stuff. There's other types of foods that can be replaced. than high sugar, low carb things. And certainly, like, if we actually care about helping those in need, there should be more of an understanding of like what they actually need. And all of these things are important. If you're somebody who is in a low place right now, guess what? The mind and body nervous system probably needs some help, right? Your mental fitness probably needs some attention. Obviously you have to eat, but all these things. But so if we're really trying to help people in need, why don't we actually bring this into a broader conversation? None of this stuff's talked about at school. Not one thing on my list, and certainly very little talk about proper nutrition in school, which again, at the very base, should just be understanding that it's for fuel, it's not for just enjoyment, and that it can be abused, and that our emotions and our bodies affect it and how it affects it. Like, if we can at least understand that, we'll be in a much healthier space, but we're not. So don't tell me it's just about food or health teaching people, because the actions don't match the behaviors. And I'm not singling out any administration, all of them, and progressively worse if you look at the last 30 something years. So we have done a bad job as leadership taking care of our people, and people need understanding and be treated like adults, not children with some stupid graphic of like, here's how to eat. Like, it's that easy. It's not, because what happens again is like people who have already had struggle say, like, oh, it's a food pyramid. Like, they're saying it's good, they're saying it's bad. Like, I don't know, what does that mean? I have milk and I can't lose weight. And guess what they do? They're not like, oh guys, like, I need to dig into the research because it's affecting their emotion. So you know what they do? They internalize it. And they start to feel like that's who they are. They're somebody who can't lose. They feel bad about themselves. And yet it was never their fault to begin with, because they don't understand, they were never taught the effect that some of these types of foods can have on your body. Jiminy Christmas, it fires me up. Number 4 is physical fitness. I know I've talked about this a little bit, but physical fitness is mobility. That's joint health. Do you know how many people are getting knee replacements that they don't need, and shoulder reconstructions and knee reconstructions? Like, I have had 3 of them, and I'm not saying you shouldn't get them. Trust me. I'm just saying there needs to be a discussion around, like, what could I do to prevent this? Is it actually possible? I can tell you, having been through 3 top orthopedics in Connecticut, UConn Medical, Olympics, you name it, I was misguided significantly as to what I needed at that time, and then what my future was going to look like. And that led me down a whole rabbit hole, which allowed me to help so many other people. And so more and more and more, I hear more people who've gotten, sometimes you need a knee or hip replacement. I'm not against that. But even when you do, there needs to be a discussion of physical movement, all right? And we're going off on a tangent now, but joint health is affected by nutrition. If you're not hydrated, your joints are going to be crap. I can promise you that. Now, I'm not going to say hydration solves arthritis. No, it's not black and white. It's very gray, but it's on a spectrum like everything else. When you're putting good food in your body, you're giving your body what it needs to operate and function optimally, which a part of that is healing. So if you have injuries, it helps, all right? Movement should be obvious, but we were born to move, we need to move, and that is actually why we eat, to fuel our movement. That's like one plus one equals 2 type of thing, right? And I don't say that to like, from a perspective of like, you should know that, you should think about that. I'm saying it from like, this is what gets me so frustrated with leadership. Like, this stuff isn't rocket science. There's a lot, everybody has different needs, but ultimately there are general things that you can't argue as humans, we need to know about, right? So why can't it just be a part of our life? I don't know, but it's not. And so anyway, movement obviously does that, and so does tissue health, right? Tissue health is something that's not talked about enough, but going back to the people getting surgeries they don't need, there are so many times people are in excruciating low back pain because their hip tissues around their psoas and their hip are jacked up. Their piriformis is super tight. They have tight hamstrings. They can't even touch their toes. They can't lift their knee up, or they can't lift their ankle over their knee. And they're gonna need a cortisone shot? Really? No. That tissue needs to be moved. It needs to be worked through regularly, constantly, and I can guarantee you will feel better. Now, maybe there are situations people have disc issues. I'm not suggesting tissue health is going to substitute a disc, and maybe it will in some cases. That's a discussion there, though. Either way, the point is that nutrition affects your tissues. And so if we're not factoring in all of these things, then we have a real problem, all right? So look, if this resonated with you, share with somebody else who's tired of starting over, who feels overwhelmed, who just would like to know a little bit more about what's going on. Also, comment pyramid below if you want me to make a more specific video on what each of those concepts I mentioned are. And I mentioned 5 earlier. There's 4 elements, but the 5th thing, honestly, is grace. All of those things should be equal. But to think that you as a messy human, and I'm messy too, and every other human who has ever survived, to think that any of us is going to just get it, oh, we're at a perfectly balanced 25% here and 25% there. No, it ain't going to happen, all right? So don't have that expectation. Just, you're going to mess up. It's not about messing up. It's about getting yourself back up. And you can say as cliche all you want, but that is what works in life for any endeavor. And so when you mess up, just get back up. It's all good. Give yourself grace. You're trying. You're watching this video, listening. You've done a lot of things up to this point. You're making the effort. It's nothing about you. It's just that you were never taught the right way to go about this. And that's it. That's a way bigger issue than you. Trust me when I say you've got this.